Hi everyone, my name is Chloe. I'm a yoga teacher here in Winston-Salem. I've been teaching about 5 years, practicing closer to 10 years, and my journey really started with this attraction to inversions. I wanted to know how to do a handstand, and coming from a dance background, I knew that I could do it, but I wasn't really sure where to begin. And after a number of years out of the dance studio, I realized I had like no wrist strength, no body awareness, and a couple accounts popped up onto my Instagram, yogi accounts like Keno McGregor, Yoga Girl, Rachel Braven, and a few other like massive yoga accounts, and they were all doing these incredible like little videos and photos of handstands. And up until that point, I really didn't correlate like a yoga practice to being that physically demanding or requiring that much strength. But as these accounts started to pop up onto my feed and I started like hitting follow on these accounts, even though I was not a yoga practitioner, I didn't consider myself a yoga practitioner at that time, it drew me in. That was the hook that got me in the door, and it's not the hook that kept me coming back because, to be honest, it takes a long time to unlock safe, strong inversions in your body. But as we all know, it doesn't really matter what our hook is to come into the yoga space. There's always so much more living right there that we didn't even step into that space for. So that was kind of my initial hook, and then all of this other teachings, lessons, practices came flooding in that at the time I didn't even know I needed. So my inversions practice is very much wrapped into my yoga practice, but getting the handstand, getting the headstand, getting any other kind of stand is not the end-all be-all to your practice. It's just like one tiny little element. So I like to encourage people to set some kind of physical goal, because having the physical goal will help you show up for yourself day after day, week after week, over and over again, even when like emotionally it might be hard to step onto your mat. If you have this physicality element as well, then you're going to be like, you know what, I'm going to put my emotions, I'm going to put whatever it is that's distracting me, that is pulling me away from my body, I'm going to put that on pause for a second and just focus on this physical goal. And through that physical goal, you end up working on your spirit and working on your heart and working on your emotions, because they're all just so deeply intertwined. We're not a body, a spirit, and a mind. We are all of that wrapped up into like one little being. So it's important not to get so hung up on the physicality, and it's important not to get so hung up on the spirituality and the mentality, because they all just work together to create this whole-bodied experience, this embodiment of the yoga practice. It does not matter how well you can do any posture in particular for you to teach that posture. What really matters is that you're sharing your authentic experience in uncovering that process. So whether it's, your child's pose. I know I have plenty of students, I have plenty of family members that child's pose is like, what? They've got bad knees, they've got sore hips, they've got stiff ankles. So it really doesn't matter what the posture is. There's going to be a certain level of difficulty in any given posture for any given student. And for you as the teacher to offer that posture, it doesn't mean that you yourself have mastered it yet, but it's important that you just share like where you are in that journey and how it's, what lessons it's bringing up for you, whether it's a physical lesson, an emotional lesson, a spiritual lesson. They all just, they're all just so deeply connected, and we're here on our mat to unlock those connections and understand those connections. So we're going to focus on the headstand. I want you to approach this video as a lecture. So Make sure you've got something to write with, something to write on, and just get comfortable. I'm going to be offering and demoing a lot of like drills, things that I do in my own practice in order to continue strengthening my inversion practice. And these are things that I teach my students every single day in every single class. Does not mean that we practice headstands in every single class, but we certainly do a lot of the strength and the mobility drills to get all of our students there, whether it happens like that or whether it takes, years and years of consistent practice, doesn't really matter. That's your journey. And I think it's important not to put like a time frame on these things as well, because they will just slowly unfold with time, with dedication, with patience, and with love. So, if at any time you want to practice some of these just to feel them in your body, I definitely encourage you to do that. Maybe hit pause, do some of the drills, and then get back into the lecture. To start, I want you to think about like how you wear your hair when you're practicing yoga. A lot of times I've got really long hair, and a lot of times I just throw it up on top of my head, and then a moment will come in practice where I'm like, oh, this is a part where I could be doing a headstand, but my hair's in the way. Instead I'll just kind of live here in the setup for it. And I see that a lot as a teacher as well. Students come in with, a bun on top of their head, ponytail on top of their head, which is totally fine. Like it's good to have your hair out of the way, one less thing to be distracted about. But then your hairstyle can turn into the distraction, especially when you're wanting to get upside down. So figure that out for your own self of, what is appropriate. I like to do like a side braid, so when I lay on my back, my braid's not, like digging into my skull. And then also when I get on top of my head, there's nothing up here to kind of dig in. So that's kind of like a silly nuance to start the lecture out with. But if you do want to start incorporating headstands into your personal practice and headstands into the sequences that you're going to offer your future students, that is something that you want to consider. Maybe say it at the start of class, like, hey, we're gonna have the couple headstand opportunities in this class. So if you need, while we're in child's pose, while we're seated, getting into our breath, if you need to adjust your hair, go ahead and do that. That will help stop the flow, or that'll help you avoid stopping the flow later in your sequencing, whether you're practicing or teaching. All right, hair, check. Step number 2, we're going to talk a little bit about anatomy. I'll try not to get too heavy into the anatomy. I'm sure all of you have a very, fully embodied anatomy book that maybe you're like avoiding reading because it's a lot of science. But I do encourage you, especially if you're going to be offering these postures to your students or putting them into your own practice, to get really, really familiar with the shoulder girdle. So for any and all inversions, there's one rotation that's happening in our shoulders, and it's external rotation. If you hold your arms out straight and look at your thumbs, internal rotation is when you're turning down towards the earth, or like if your hands are by your sides, you're turning your thumbs in towards your own body. So notice how that is wrapping the head of my shoulder forwards, and then it's also making my shoulder blades kind of wing out away from my back. So if I were to lift my arms up overhead, they're not going to go very high because you start to get a bone-on-bone interruption. So the head of my, I might have said femur like 30 seconds ago. It's your humerus. The head of my humerus is now knocking into my collarbone. And we want to avoid that. Like obviously I can't lift my arms up any higher when they're internally rotated. So we go for external rotation, thumbs up towards the ceiling or even towards the wall behind you, and then lift your arms. Notice how much higher you can lift your arms when you're coming from that external rotation. And when we're in our headstand, usually I'm encouraging people to do the traditional headstand with your hands interlaced behind your head and then elbows wide. So if you let your elbows come really, really wide, right here you should be able to see that my elbows are below the crown of my head, which means that 100% of my weight would be on the crown of my head. That's not going to feel too good in my neck. So instead, we hug elbows in. So still working with that external rotation. There's no bone-on-bone interruption. And then we elevate our scapulas. So we lift our shoulders. I'm going to turn around so you can see that in my back. So external rotation, palms face up. If your hands were down your sides, you would be wrapping your thumbs away from the body and letting your palms face forwards. And then bring your arms up so we still keep that external rotation. Interlace the fingers and then bring your hands just to the very back of your head. For a second, squeeze your shoulder blades together. And if you're in front of a mirror or you take a little video of yourself, you can see just where your elbows are in relationship to the crown of your head. I always encourage people to have maybe like 70 or 80% of the weight on their elbows. I don't think that would be possible right here. So instead of squeezing the shoulder blades back and opening the chest, we actually want to protract. We want to broaden the shoulder blades, hug the elbows in, and then elevate. So there's a couple different directions that we're working with right here. Let's go over those one more time. Arms down. We externally rotate, so the elbow pits and palms are forwards, and then lift your arms overhead so it keeps that external rotation. Interlace your hands behind the back of your head. Protract your shoulders, so that's spreading the shoulder blades apart, creating a concave shape in the chest. And then elevate your shoulders. Lift your shoulder blades up towards your ears. So I'm not crunching and just drawing the shoulders. Instead, I'm moving down here from my rotator cuff. The rotator cuff and your shoulder are the 4 muscles surrounding your shoulder blade. So it's the infraspinatus, which is the muscle right down here that you can touch. It's below the spine of your scapula. It is your subscap, which is deep within. So if you bring your thumb into your armpit and press and squeeze your shoulder blade, you can start to feel the subscap on the very inside of the shoulder blade. It's the supraspinatus, which is above the spine. So if you bring your fingers onto your shoulder blade, you can kind of feel that spine, the ridge of that bone. So you've got a muscle above it, the supraspinatus, and the infraspinatus just below it. And then you have your teres major and minor, which are in here working from the humerus to the shoulder blade. So all 4 of those muscles are broadening when we protract, and then they're elevating to lift. Notice how that all of a sudden brought my elbows higher than the crown of my head, which means in theory I should be able to float my head in my headstand. One drill that I like to start students on to really understand that shoulder girdle movement, the protraction, elevation, external rotation that's happening within this really complex joint, is to have them just grab a block. So if you have a block at home, hopefully you do, since we're doing everything at home. If you don't have a yoga block yet, send me a message and I can help you get one. So you want to grab, it doesn't matter if you have a thicker one or this smaller one, but we're going to bring our hands to the smallest surface area, so that end point. Spread your fingers out, so instead of gripping with your fingers, just keep your palms wide so that you really squeeze with the heel of your hand and then the base of every knuckle. Extend your block straight out in front of you. And now squeeze. When you squeeze, you'll start to feel the protraction in your shoulder girdle. So it's concave through the chest, like a bowl shape through the chest, and then spreading out through the shoulders. Squeeze. Just keep squeezing through the heels of the hands, spread out your fingers, and then spark energy into your fingers. Now keep your elbows in line with the shoulders and slowly start to bend your elbows. Try not to let the elbows wing out. We're just bringing the block right in front of the forehead, and then re-extend. Do that again. Inhale, bend. Exhale, extend. One more time, bend, and then extend. This time bend, and then keep this 90-degree shape start to bring your elbows right in line with your ears as high as you can. So now you start to feel not only the protraction, but the elevation. Lift your elbows up to the ceiling, and then notice how that lengthens in your spine as well. Just hold here. Notice if you started gripping your fingertips, spread out your fingertips, squeeze with just the palms. And then bring it down, straighten, and release. Whew. That really burns, or like brings some heat into the arms really quick. So that's a good kind of like check-in drill, especially if you're going to be teaching a sequence where you add a headstand halfway through, or you save headstand towards the end. I like to start with some kind of like slow strengthening and body awareness drill, so that all of the students know, like, okay, I need to hug my elbows in and then elevate up. Sometimes that language gets lost when we're just teaching a flow and really getting into the sequence. So if you spend that first couple minutes in your practice, in your teaching, of breaking down what is actually going to be happening in the shoulders, it helps create the muscle memory so that when your students start going upside down, their body already remembers this. It already knows where it's going to go. And then it just takes out one more step that they have to go through the whole body checklist. So that brings me to when we actually lift our legs up overhead. A little secret is in a lot of my classes, I never actually let my students lift their legs up over their head unless they've been practicing in tons and tons of classes with me, or for years and years before they ever stepped into my class. But when I'm getting beginner students, or new clients, and they express to me that a goal is headstand or any other inversion, I really start with the basics. First of all, it reduces their risk of injury, and it also builds a lot of confidence. So more than any physical injury I've ever seen, I haven't seen that many happen in class, but more than that, I see students with this sense of fear. Maybe it came from a previous teacher that put the fear in their practice of don't go upside down, don't do a headstand because it's gonna, break something. And a lot of our yoga practice is uncovering layers and layers of deep-rooted fear so that we can unlock our greatest potential. Everyone is strong enough to do a headstand, but the most of it comes in our mind. Most of it is getting over the fear of falling out of the shape. And I find that really breaking down the headstand and going really slow and not focusing on the end goal of feet overhead, perfect straight line, but focusing on all of these teeny tiny little steps to get there, it really helps your students build the confidence, and then you as the teacher have much less to worry about. Say it's 2022, and we're finally able to get back into a studio with real human students, and you've got 15 people in class, and all of a sudden you're like, all right, and headstand, everyone kick up. You are only one person, and you can only be helping one person at a time. So you're either going to spend 10 to 15 minutes helping each individual person get into their headstand, or you want to have tools that you can keep everyone on the same page safely and then have everyone working on these little steps to get upside down. So let's get into those steps. I like the approach, and I like this approach, and I have called it the egg shape. We're going to take the egg shape in headstand, and then in the next videos that you'll watch, we'll build it into our forearm stand and eventually into the handstand. So the egg shape is essentially child's pose. I've already mentioned child's pose. I know that child's pose is hard for some folks, especially if you have any kind of knee joint issues, but when we think of our child's pose, it's really pulling into center, creating this little safe cocoon where you can breathe, you can close your eyes, and you can tune into this area of the body. All of your inversions should come from a very, very stable base. Your base is your core, your base is your hips, your base is your low back. When you add momentum coming into your inversion practice, there's a second where you fully disassociate from your whole body because you have all this momentum flinging up into the air. And instead I want to take that away, right? We want to build the strong base and then keep the strong base to slowly lift ourselves up. It's called a press. But if you think about your press as something as simple as a child's pose, kind of take some of that fear out of it. All right, so we've talked about the shoulder girdle, and now we're gonna take that shoulder girdle engagement, whole setup for traditional Shirshasana, and bring it into our first egg-shaped headstand. Notice that for the first, 3 or 4 drills, my feet aren't gonna leave the mat. All right, if we look at our child's pose right here, I'm gonna do child's pose with knees together, sitting on my heels, and then I'm gonna walk my elbows out. So you'll bring your elbows down, give them a little scoot as far as you can. If you want, you can interlace your fingers, and then just bring your chin to your chest and slowly let the head come down. This pose right away opens up the triceps. Our triceps get so much strength through all of our low plank, all of our chaturangas throughout a vinyasa practice. If your elbows are down and your forehead is not coming down between your arms, that's okay. But perhaps spend more time right here, not worrying so much about getting the crown of your head and down and your hips high, but just focus on opening up the space through your triceps. If you came into this shape with me, slowly roll up. And one more time, let's build the foundation of our headstand, but just from a comfortable seat. So externally rotate, flip the palms up, lift your arms, interlace your fingers, and then bring your hands right behind your head. For a moment, squeeze your elbows back, open up your chest. And now protract the shoulders, draw the elbows in. Notice that when I draw my elbows in, right away, it tucked my ribs down into my belly, and it kind of locked in that core shape. We want to keep that core shape the whole time, from start to finish. Elevate your shoulders, so you lift your elbows like you're gonna tap them onto the ceiling. And then just breathe right here. Close your eyes. Visualize that child's pose shape, but with a different center of gravity. What will that feel like if your elbows, your forearms, and just the very, very tip top of your head are on the mat, and then you draw your knees into your chest? Take a deep breath in. Full breath out. Keep lifting your elbows up towards the ceiling. And then draw your low belly in towards the spine and root it down towards your tailbone. That Uddiyana Bandha, that low core lock, is what we want to engage before our feet leave the mat. Take another inhale. Full exhale. Good. Now slowly blink your eyes open if you took that practice with me. Notice when we were in our child's pose, you felt a lot of stretch down through the triceps and even down into the lats. This is the space that needs to be really open for our headstand practice, particularly the traditional headstand where we're on our forearms instead of tripod where we're on our hands. When I see people with more muscles than me on their shoulders and their arms, so particularly like a more masculine physique, a lot of times it's a bit harder to lift the elbows, to externally rotate, elevate, and protract. So those 3 movements in the shoulders that are setting up our traditional headstand, they have a little bit more mass, so it's harder to create that movement in the shoulders. And so that's where spending more time right here is going to really benefit, because we do need this muscle, the triceps, to elongate as well as the lats. You can help that out if you take your blocks, lift your hips, and then bring your elbows to the front edge of the blocks and then start to press back like you're coming into your child's pose. So you don't even have to go all the way deep into the child's pose, especially if you're needing more opening in your lats and in your triceps. Keep that in mind, especially for a masculine build, so maybe a male body, somebody with a little bit more muscle mass in their shoulder girdle. All right, now we're going to start getting upside down. Remember, it goes in steps. There is no rush. You are not a better yoga practitioner because you can do a headstand or any other inversion. But as you start teaching this, you may find, or teaching yoga in general, you may find that more and more students come to you and they're like so excited about the inversions. They're like, I want to do a headstand. Why? I don't know why. I don't know why I wanted to do it. I just thought it looked cool. And then as I started the process, I was like, dang, this is really hard. And I think that was the hook, is that it was so challenging for me to unlock it in my body that it brought that tapas, it brought that dedication element where I was like, man, I really, really want this pose, so I'm going to keep showing up and I'm going to keep doing all of the work to get there. And along the way, like I said earlier, all of these lessons and little like symbols started to play into my practice. All right. Go ahead and set your arms. Fingers are interlaced, protracted, elevated. And now tuck your chin to your chest. Slowly bring your elbows down to the mat, and then your wrists and even your pinkies. So I like my pinkies to touch just as little like breaks. I stack one in front of the other. And then the very back of your skull, the occipital ridge, tucks into your palms, while the crown of your head pushes down into the earth. Now, more than your head, remember those movements in your shoulders. So you protract, spread out, and then elevate, push down through the elbows. You can hold here, or you can tuck your toes and straighten your legs, and then walk your toes in as close as you can. It's okay to bend your knees, especially if that takes some of the tension out of your hamstrings, but gets your hips up over your shoulders. So we're really looking for hips over shoulders. That way when our feet start to lift, our core is already set. Keep your feet on the mat and then just rock back towards your heels and then up towards your toes. If you're practicing this with me, take about 5 breaths. Notice that moment when you start to sink into your neck. Remember, push down through your elbows. Try to keep the weight off of your head. So it's spreading out from elbow to wrist, wrist to elbow. One more breath. And now slowly walk your feet back. Come down to your knees. Rest in child's pose. So that was like, I don't know, I haven't broken down all these steps. We'll say that was like step 5 to coming into the headstand. So again, when I'm teaching vinyasa classes, I may save that for like somewhere halfway through the practice or somewhere towards the end of practice. Once everyone's body is really warmed up, their breath is set, they're in their ujjayi breath. Sometimes, I'll say, okay, you can stay in downward facing dog. You can come into child's pose, or we can practice something like dolphin pose, because dolphin pose, you're on your elbows. It's super easy to get people to interlace their hands and then just prop their head down and practice their egg-shaped headstand, All right, so if that was we'll just label that step 5. And then let's look at step 6. Step 6, we're gonna start lifting our feet off of the mat, not both at the same time. And I want you to watch. So if you've been practicing some of these drills with me, for this one, just watch. There's something called the cheerleader leg. Cheerleader legs happen when we lose our spatial awareness. So this happened to me for years in my inversion practice. I would hop my feet off of the mat, I would lose all of the core engagement, and then my legs, I have no idea what they would do. So I call it the cheerleader legs, where they just fling around. That's super, super common when people are trying to hop up into their inversion, but they don't quite understand how to engage their core just yet. We can take that cheerleader element out of practice. I know I certainly didn't want that to be part of my yoga practice, by practicing the egg shape. So same setup, fingers interlace, elbows in so that your shoulders are protracted, elevated, and then bring the whole unit down. Tuck your toes, straighten your legs, and then walk your feet in as close as you can. Now come into a half child's pose. with your right leg. So instead of lifting my leg up, I'm hugging my knee in because it's that child's pose shape. And then with your left foot, push back through the heel and then roll up to your tiptoe. Do that a couple of times. Keep pressing down through your elbows. Try to lighten the weight that's in your neck and in your head. And then all the while, you're keeping that half child's pose shape in the right leg. Now bring your right toes down. Half child's pose with the left thigh. Pull your left thigh in and then roll up to your right tiptoes and then roll back. Inhale up. Exhale back. Inhale up. Exhale back. One more. And then release. Step both feet down and land in your child's pose. Every time that you take one of these drills, especially when your head is down, try not to pop up too quick. Just take a couple breaths to balance your blood, balance your breath before lifting it all the way back up over head on top of hips. All right, we're gonna go for one more. This one will lift both of our feet coming into that egg shape. Remember, no cheerleader legs, no momentum, but instead a slow process so that you are essentially pressing up into your inversion. Doing this work in headstand will carry you into other inversion practices, and it will also build this sense of like confidence, minimizing the fear of getting upside down. So notice at no point am I going to say, okay, now just like get your legs up. No. It doesn't just happen like that. There's no quick, there's no like shortcut to get upside down, and you'll get there sooner the more work that you put in. Like you only get out of your yoga practice what you put into your yoga practice. So if you're trying to unlock more physical postures, well, you have to do like the slow burning work to get there. And I promise there's really no like tip or trick that's gonna get you there. It's simply experiencing it in your body and then analyzing that experience. Like, okay, what worked that time? What didn't work that time? Let me try something different going into the next time. Okay, this one, full child's pose or full egg shape, however you want to refer to it, while we're on our head. External rotation, hands behind the head, protract by squeezing your elbows in, and then lift your elbows up higher than your head. Tuck chin to chest, and bring the crown of your head down. Tuck your toes, straighten your legs, and then walk your toes in as close as you can. Remember that core cue that I gave, so you hug your low belly in towards the spine and then push it towards your tailbone. Hug your right knee into your chest, half child's pose. Now, if you feel really light in your left toes, don't move your knee, just flex your foot and see if you can lift your toes. And if you can, then slowly hug your left knee into your chest, hold your child's pose. Notice how my back is still round, and right here I can get a big protraction in the shoulder, so I'm going to drive down through the elbows. And you can stay here in your child's pose. The good thing about this is if you fall out, you're not going to roll forwards, you're going to fold all the way back down and land in your child's pose. All of our postures, or most of our postures, are essentially like the same shape, but different center of gravity. I could show you that in like at least 30 different postures, standing, on our back, on our feet, on our side. It's all just different center of gravity and figuring out our like spatial awareness of how we take up space in our surroundings. So remember, child's pose is your headstand. Does not matter if you get the straight line, especially if you're hugging into your center. The straight line is going to come really easily, but over time. There's no quick fix. Let's do it one more time. This time we're going to slowly unwind the legs. So hands behind the head, protract, elevate, chin to chest, crown of the head down. Drive down into the elbows. Try to let your elbows hold most of your weight. Tuck your toes, lift your hips, walk it in, right knee, and then left knee, holds,
Or start to uncurl your low back. So you'll let your hips lift. Notice how my legs are still bent really deep, hugging in. And then I'm going to straighten out my hips, but not my knees. So just the hips start to straighten. Squeeze your glutes, and then start to straighten the knees. So it's a really slow process. And then to come out, I like to reverse. Bend the knees. Pull the thighs into the chest. And then land in child's pose. Let your blood, your breath rebalance. And then slowly roll all the way up. Give it a little shake, let it go. Good. Egg shape. All right, I want to get into one other way to come into your headstand. And again, it has no kicking, no momentum. I feel like students express a sense of fear in inversion when they kick up. So maybe they're not aware that they're kicking up and using all of this momentum, but if they say like I really want to learn how to do a headstand, but I just have all this fear, and then I say, okay, well, can you show me like, your process so far, especially if they've, been going to other people's classes or have say they just moved here and are bringing other experience into my class with them. And a lot of times immediately they just kind of come down and then they kick their legs up without too much like set up, And so when they say like, oh, I really want to know how to do it, but I just have all of this fear, like I do not want to come away from the wall, it's because up until that point, they haven't really thought about the anatomy that's happening in their shoulders, and they also haven't thought about like what happens once they're up. So the egg shape, this little child's pose, cute little headstand, it takes away some of those elements. It helps you build confidence in your body because you know step by step what's going to happen, and then like, well, if I do straighten my legs, I've already got my core set, I've already got my shoulder girdle set, like I'm good. Now all I have to do is like straighten and extend and act like I'm going to lift the ceiling up with my toes. So I really encourage you to not rush your process. I really encourage you to start with the basics, start with understanding the function of your shoulders when you're upside down, and then slowly working it into being upside down. Okay. If you ever have a student, or if you yourself have experienced any kind of neck injury, head injury, and that is playing into your fear of getting upside down or fear of putting weight on your head, in no way should anyone ever pressure you to try a headstand anyway. But getting upside down does have so many health benefits for your body. Just in the vessels in our legs, there's these little valves, like every few inches there's a valve that only opens one way, so that when your blood is being pumped back up your legs, we inhale oxygen, all of the oxygen gets exchanged for CO2, and then that freshly oxygenated blood goes to our heart, and then our heart pumps our blood all the way down to our feet. But then our heart is also pumping our blood all the way back up so that we can take the CO2 blood out. So those valves help the blood not pool down in our feet. So when we get upside down, we're alleviating some of that pressure that builds up in our heart and builds up in these little valves. It also like drains your lymphatic system, so it gives your kidneys and your liver a little bit of a break, like a little bit of a flush. That's why sometimes you get like really lightheaded when you're upside down and then you stand up too quick. It's the lymphatic system. It's all of the liquid in your body just kind of getting like shooken up, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we want to make getting upside down accessible for as many people as possible. When you get upside down, you'll feel an immediate increase in your blood pressure, but getting upside down regularly and safely can overall lower your blood pressure. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but like think about when you do shoulder stand. I feel like my head and my eyeballs are gonna explode when I do shoulder stand because it's getting this big boost in blood pressure like really quickly.
But when I do that every single day, my overall blood pressure is like really healthy, really manageable. So particularly if you've been diagnosed with high blood pressure, you want to be careful starting your inversion practice, but don't necessarily like nix it altogether. Consider it like almost like a prescription for like, ooh, if I do like, if I rest on my back and let my legs prop against the wall, in time, if I do that for 30 seconds every day, in time, I can actually lower my blood pressure. It's putting ease in your heart, putting ease in your legs. So let's look at a supported headstand where our head actually floats. Our head will not touch the mat, will not touch the ground, neither will your hands. This one is helpful if you have a partner at home, a friend at home, a roommate, like whoever is with you during this time, because it does require a little bit more core work to get your legs up, simply because you don't have anything to push down into the earth. So if you do have a partner, maybe ask them like, hey, if you could just help me out really quick. Don't hold me, but just help me. I'll show you that. So let's move over to the wall. Okay, this next demo I'm going to show you, like I said, is for the times that you don't want to put any weight on your head, whether you've had a neck injury or your neck is just feeling a little sore, but you still want to get the benefit of getting fully inverted upside down. They sell, I think they're called like feet up trainers or like headstand benches. So you can look up, a properly made bench for this. Or you can get creative and grab 2 chairs or 2 stools at your house. You just want to make sure that they are high enough that your head will not be on the ground. So I'm just using what I have. These are 2 stools that we have at the studio. Happens to work perfect for this little demo. The stools or the bench or the chair, whatever you're going to use, make sure that it's not going to slide or tip. So mine has 4 legs evenly distributed. It's not going to tip if I like lean on one side or lean on one side. So we're going to bring our head to the very center, and then the base of the stool or the chair supports your shoulders. So then your head ends up just being like free hanging in the center. It does require a little more core strength to get your legs up. Notice how I'm set up against the wall. So if you do set your chairs up, make sure the wall is nearby in case you do add just like a teeny little hop up into your child's pose, your egg shape. And then your low back or your hips will catch and stop that roll onto the wall. So I'm going to show you first with no assistant, no teacher, anything like that. And then I'll show you how you could help someone experience this pose, especially if they don't quite have the pelvic girdle strength and the core strength unlocked just yet. So I like to bring my hands down and then just slowly guide my head into the very center. So you want to make sure it's a good distance where it's supporting both of your shoulders, but your head is not like squeezed in. So I ground down through my palms, roll up to my tiptoes, and again, I'm going to follow that same process that we did for our headstand. So one knee in, and then a little hop off the bottom foot, other knee in. So you could hold here or slowly start to extend. I like to find the wall with my feet, and then just extend the legs up. So this is more of like a restorative inversion. You can kind of like let your body relax, especially if you're supported on the wall. You could also challenge your center line of gravity by bringing your feet off the wall and then finding your stability, your core. So my glutes are squeezing in, legs are squeezing in, even my toes are active. And it just gives this great adrenal cleanse in the whole system, draining the lymphatic system, draining the blood out of the legs. To come out, it's the same thing. Knees into the chest, and then toes all the way down to the earth. Slowly stand up. Keep a softness in your knees, maybe a little bounce. And if you do need to sit down, you can take a seat right on whatever you used. So again, if you're not confident that you have like 2 stools or chairs that are going to really support you in this process, feel free to look up like feet up trainer, headstand bench, and I'm sure you'll find like 10 different companies that sell some kind of support for this process. I'm going to show you with my incredible #1 student, Neil Craver. He's going to come and demo how somebody can help you get into this shape or how you can help your future students get in here. Dun, da, da, da. Neil. All right, Neil. I think this height or this width will be good for you too. So I would like you to bring your head down into the trench. Yep, so see how he just brought his arms wide and scooted it in? Good, he's already got his hands set, and then he's walked in as far as he can. So I'm gonna have him bend his leg that's closest to me. Notice how right away he lifted his foot up. But instead, I want him to think child's pose. Hug your thigh into your chest. Now, I'm not going to grab him or pull him up, but I'm going to create a little bit of resistance so that he can do most of the work. I'm just there as support to help his momentum move in the right direction. So my hand comes to his shin, and then I just give him a little bit of pressure. And now I say, okay, Neil, push into me and lift your other leg up. Good. Yeah, so he can hang out here. Do you feel okay if I let go? All right, so I'm going to let go. And then from here, his hips are now supported on the wall. And so he's able to do whatever he wants with his legs. He may want to stay here, or he may want to bring his toes to the wall. He feels pretty comfortable, so he wants to extend. And then notice what it feels like to relax your body, relax your legs, your quads. And then notice what it feels like to light up all the way through your feet as if you are holding a handstand or headstand. How does it feel in your head and your neck? Good? All right, so I don't hold him up here. You never want to hold your students longer. You want them to have control to come out and in as freely as they want. But again, if your student has communicated a little bit of fear or apprehension, you want to let them know that you're here. And whenever they're ready to come down, to just tell you, I'm ready to come down. You ready to come down? All right, so he brings one knee in. I'm going to go ahead and give him that support just to slow down the process. Now bring your other foot all the way down, all the way down. I give him just a little bit of pressure so he doesn't jam his toes when he comes down. Good job. How'd that feel? Stand up really slow. Let everything balance in the body. Maybe give it a little wiggle. Well done. Thanks for the demo. Good job. All right, let's take a look. All right, we have one more headstand option to go through. This one is also really, really popular, especially if you have tighter shoulders, tighter lats, tighter triceps. It's the tripod headstand. So this one, instead of bringing your hands behind your head and then hugging your elbows in, you're still keeping that shape that we did with the block, but you're holding your hands out to where you can see them. The biggest thing that I see in people attempting a tripod headstand, and maybe they can hold it for a little bit, but they're a little bit shaky, can't really do too much with their legs besides just freeze in shape or cheerleader their legs, is that their hands are really wide, their elbows are really wide. So we're still working with that same rotation and setup in the shoulders. Externally rotated, protracted, so you're concave through the chest, and then elevating your shoulders. So when I set this up and my hands are on the mat, I want to be able to see my fingertips and then see 90 degrees in the wrists, 90 degrees in the elbows, and I don't know, maybe 90 degrees in the shoulders too. I haven't really looked at the shoulder angle. Okay. We'll look at a different type of leg and hip movement coming into this one. I'm going to introduce the puppy press or the straddle press. The best pose that you can do every single day or every single time that you practice yoga for your straddle or for your puppy press is a straddle forward fold. So let's take a couple of breaths there. So just bringing your legs wide. I always like to have a block or two nearby for my elbows. Even though I'm pretty mobile in my hips at this point, I always start kind of narrow and up a little bit further than my body allows, simply so that I can check in with my sacrum and with the pelvic girdle. We've spoken a lot to the shoulder girdle up to this point. Now we're going to think a little bit more about what the hips are doing. My body is pretty, I don't have that much muscle mass. So because I can't muscle my way through a lot of my postures, I have to default onto my mobility.
mobility and flexibility are two things that I have had to work my entire life for. It's not like my default setting to have really open hamstrings and open hips. It's something that I have to do every single day on my mat. So whether I'm just doing like focusing on a yin practice where I'm spending a couple of minutes in the posture and just breathing through the posture, that's really where I've gotten the most opening and the most access to how I can use this mobility and flexibility to my advantage for like the fancy, handstand postures and things like that. So we've been here for maybe a minute. Let's just spend another minute longer. If you want to start kind of wiggling side to side, if you're in this shape with me. I love to incorporate seated forward folds with a hip opener, specifically for the puppy press and the straddle press. So we'll start these two press styles in our tripod headstand, and then in our later videos, I'll revisit those for the forearm stand and the handstand. What you want to look for when you're in just your regular seated straddle are toes up towards the ceiling, so your feet are flexed. That helps you activate your quads while releasing the hamstrings. And then I think about kind of winging my toes back a little bit, so deepening the external rotation that's happening within each hip socket. And then you want to think about what's happening in your pelvis. So a lot of us, our default is to tuck our tailbone into round and reach. But instead of reaching and putting our forehead to the ground, I want you to think about tapping your heart to the ground. So it starts upright. Draw your shoulders down and back. Use your breath to lift, lengthen your lungs, which is going to help lift, lengthen your spine. And now instead of rounding and collapsing forwards, keep this broadening and then start to lean the whole body forward. So it's not your upper body folding into the lower body, it's the whole unit shifting forwards. So that helps keep the low back lengthened, lumbar spine lengthened. And it actually helps you spread out your sacral joint. So that sacral joint is like fused vertebra down at the very like base of your spine, the back of your pelvic girdle, pelvic bowl. And it can get really locked with the hip joints. And that's where like we don't have that much rotation available in the hip joints. But through like mindfully lengthening and folding in, you can really help spread out that space, whether you're in down dog, whether you're standing on your feet in your wide leg forward fold, or right here where I am in the seated wide leg fold. All right, if you took that shape with me, slowly back out. Remember that shape for your practices, especially if you are wanting to unlock this puppy press. All right. Come onto your hands and your knees. Remember to set up our tripod headstand. Our hands stay on the mat. Super important that you spread your fingers out as wide as you can so you feel a stretching at the webbing of each finger. This is also true for your downward facing dog. Anytime your hands are rooted into the mat, make sure you're making the biggest palm print that you can. Like think about when you're a little kid and you paint your palm and then put it on paper or put it on the wall or whatever. I'm sure everyone at some point has made a paint palm print. We're trying to create those perfect paint palm prints anytime our hands are rooting. All right. Notice if your fingers are turned in a little bit, turn them out just ever so slightly, like you're just starting to open up a jar, maybe a pickle jar or a spaghetti sauce jar, I don't know. I like to look at my index fingers and make my index fingers parallel. Come up onto your knees, tuck your chin to your chest, and then slowly do a little low push-up till the crown or the top of your head, like at your hairline, taps down. So like forehead, but the space between forehead and crown of the head. Again, exhale, slowly lower, hug your elbows in until your hairline just taps, and then lift it back up. So that amount of strength that you feel in your forearms, in your biceps, and even in your triceps as you lower, you want to keep that engagement the whole time you're in your tripod headstand. At no point should it feel light in your hands. You're holding your weight in your hands more than you're holding it on your head. So again, chest forwards, elbows in, start to bend, tuck your chin to your chest,
This time, come onto the crown of your head. Tuck your toes, straighten your legs, and then walk your feet in as close as you can. Step your feet off of your mat so they're wide. Now notice how my feet are still really far away from my hands and really far away from my head. So this way, I can see my hands, I can see my feet, and it takes some of that guesswork out. All right, rock over to your left foot, and then just lift your right leg as high as you can, and then bring your right toes down. Rock over to your right toes and lift your left leg as high as you can, and then come back down. Feet together, knees down, child's pose. Slowly roll up.
So we'll think of that as step, I don't know. If you're taking notes, you know what step I'm on. I've got no idea at this point. But my point is that we go slow, all right? You really want to get confident and strong in all of these set up postures, even though they can feel so tedious. We're like, I just want to do the headstand. Like, just let me hop up. Don't do that to yourself. Go really, really slow. Fall in love with the process, because in this process, you are going to learn so much about yourself, from like the way that you react, the way that you speak to yourself when it's really hard, the way that you like view your success or your failure on your yoga mat. A little secret is that like you cannot fail in a yoga practice. There's like 7 billion ways to practice yoga because it's yours. It's no one else's. All right. This time, we're going to get a little bit more rotation happening in the hips. So remember, that was the tripod setup, and then we just kind of tilted from foot to foot. A lot of times I see people try to come into their tripod headstand from a wide leg forward fold. It's not wrong, it's not bad, but what I see is a lot of like quivering and shaking. Why? Because our feet are too far out to the sides to where we can't actually get like that rocking sensation, like rocking our weight forwards onto our head. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm gonna set this up as if I was in my wide leg forward fold. First, I'd lengthen, I'd fold as low as I can, ground my palms, and then ground my head. So yes, I can still see my hands. Maybe I should walk them back a little bit. But now if I'm going to lift my legs up, there's like a quick little moment where all of my weight like comes out of my feet, and I don't have quite as much control over my core. So I really like to set it up where I can see my feet. So bringing crown of the head down. Straighten the legs, step them out to the sides, so not too wide. Now, we're going to do the same thing that we did before. Rocking over to the left foot, lift your right leg. This time, bend your knee. Get open through the hips, so a little twist in the torso. And now think about tapping your right knee to your right elbow. Tap. Notice how much higher my hips came. So my hips are a little bit far back here. But if I follow my external rotation and think about tapping knee to elbow or even to the armpit, it gets me really high with my hips and really light in that left foot. Let's try it on the other side. Right toes down. Left leg lifts. Bend the left knee. Open up your hip as if you're going to like flip your dog. And now trace your knee really wide and all the way to the left armpit so that you get light into your right toes. And then release. Same process. To come out, child's pose. Slowly roll up. Give your hands a little shake. So this one we do have more pressure on the hands. For me, I spend a lot of like time on my hands in down dog, in chaturanga, in handstands. So when I'm doing a headstand practice, I usually go for the traditional Shirshasana versus the tripod, just because my wrists need that little bit of a break. But again, if you're really tight in your sides, or if you have a student that has a lot of muscle mass happening in their chest and their shoulders, tripod headstand is going to be a little bit more accessible for that body type. All right, so this is working our puppy press legs, remember. We're gonna do it one more time. When we rotate our top leg around, it requires like every ounce of spatial awareness that you can muster. It's gonna take a lot of trial and error for you to get that rotation working, because all of a sudden we're like upside down and our legs start to do the whole cheerleader thing, just kind of like shooting out into the air in every direction. I encourage you to film your practice. Don't film your practice for anyone else other than to like uncover what is actually happening, because how you feel going into the posture sometimes is disconnected from what you're actually doing. And especially like this year, 2020, we're all practicing by ourselves at home. So it's the perfect time for you to kind of like do a little excavation and be your teacher. You know, like I tell my students that all the time, like, you're your best teacher. You live in your body. You experience these postures. So tell me how it feels, and then let's work with that. This is your time to do that too. Film yourself. Don't critique yourself, like don't be hard on yourself, but just do it as if you're teaching a student. Like what would you look at that practice and look at that process, and then how would you move forward from there? You can do that with your own practice. It's the beauty of technology. All right, so this time both of our legs are gonna come up off of the ground, only if you feel confident, and if you do know that you have a lot of your weight in your hands. Remember to squeeze your elbows in. Make sure you can see your elbows, you can see your hands. That way they're not too wide, and that minimizes your risk of flipping over. I have flipped over like more times than I care to say because I didn't start my inversion process this way. It took me like a long time of trial and error to figure out like the safe, effective way to share with others. So here you go. All right, hands down. Chin to chest, crown of the head down. Notice how much space I have from my hands to my head. They're not wide, but instead they're here so I can protract and push down. Straighten the legs, walk your toes in. Step your feet wide. Pick your leg that you want to lift. I'm going to lift my right leg. Open up your hip, bend your knee, and now think about tapping knee all the way into the armpit. This time don't tap your leg, but let the other leg float up. And then just straighten your right leg. So you end up in a straddle. You can hold here, or you can bring your legs all the way up and over. Grip through your fingers, your fingertips, so that your second knuckle kind of bends. And breathe. Think about squeezing a piece of paper right between your big toes, and then send that piece of paper up to the sky. Hug your knees to your chest. And then slowly land in your child's pose. Breathe. Roll up. Keep your eyes closed for a moment. Just resettle. Let go of that work. Detach from the result. Fall in love with the process. If you did that work with me, you can slowly blink your eyes open. I've got one more demo. I'm going to show you how you can help a student get into this, especially if you have like your partner at home or a friend that you live with or whomever that you can be like physically teaching to right now. One day we will be teaching like in real life, and it is useful to come into that student-teacher relationship with confidence, where if someone is going to ask you, hey, I'd love for you to help me get into a headstand, you're like, okay, let me think about this. Yes, I can help you. In no way are you putting your student in the shape for them, but you're simply giving them like a little bit more surface area to work with so that they can do the work themselves without the fear of like just being out there on their own. So again, I'm going to ask Mr. Neil Craver to come in and give us a little headstand demo. All right, Neil, we're gonna work on your, we're gonna work on your egg shape headstand. So you can start down on your knees, bring your arms out wide. Bring your arms out wide, so just in a kneeling position, just like this. All right, kneel. Externally rotate your shoulders. Good. So he flipped his palms up to the ceiling. Now lift your arms up overhead. Now Neil has pretty open lats, pretty open triceps, so he's totally like, the traditional headstand is totally accessible in his body, even though he does have like much denser shoulders than I do. Bend your elbows, interlace your fingers, and bring them right to the back of your head. Not too low on the neck. Lift them up just a little bit. Okay, now squeeze your shoulder blades together. Let your elbows come wide for a moment. This is what we don't want to do, all right? Squeeze your elbows together. Protract the shoulders. Good, and then lift, lift it. See how much higher his elbows are than his head. Bring your chin to your chest, elbows and crown of the head all the way down to the mat. Start to lift your hips. Good. Tuck your toes, straighten your legs. Now, I'm going to ask him to hold right here, and I'm going to step on this side. So Neil's going to come into his half egg shape. He's going to draw this leg that's closest to me into his chest. Now, just like I did in our other demo, I'm just going to push his shin into his body, and then I'm going to bring my other hand to help support his low back. And then I'm going to tell him, push into my hand and lift your other leg. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Good. Now hold, squeeze, squeeze. Good. So at no point am I grabbing him or holding him. This hand is here more for like mental support, and then this hand is here to help him control and get that little lift in his legs. Now slowly extend the leg that I'm not touching back down to the earth. All the way down and into your child's pose. Good job. Remember, when you are putting your hands on students, you want to make sure that you're really clear with what direction you want them to go in and what you want them to do. So a lot of times I'll do like a little tap, or I'll say like the leg I'm not touching, bring it to, this direction. Especially when we're talking about inversions, our spatial awareness like goes out the window. So you want to make sure that you're not only providing like clear physical touch, but clear verbal communication as well. Neil, do you want to extend your legs all the way up to the ceiling? Let's do it. Okay. So here's one more inversion. So especially Neil already has the core strength. He doesn't need me to hold his shin and help him get that last little bit of lift. But maybe he's ready to do like just a full press up, and he just wants a body here instead of being at the wall. So Neil, do your setup. Come into your egg shape. Traditional headstand setup. Yeah, crown of the head down, elbows in, shoulders protracted, straighten your legs. Now, as soon as his hips come up, I'm going to step in and let him feel my knees. So my knees are just barely touching his shoulder blades, and then my hands just grab the outside of his hips. Yes, I turn to the side so I don't get feet in my face, and then I tell him to slowly extend. So I'm not stepping away, but I'm right here for support, and then I'm just squeezing his hips in. And if I want to, he feels pretty solid and stable. I'm going to bring my hands up to his shins. And then I'm going to put my fist right between his ankles and tell him to squeeze my hand. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. Good. So this is super helpful to get somebody out of their low back. Tuck your tailbone. Squeeze into my hand. Lift, lift, lift. Push down through your elbows. You ready to come out, Neil? All right. Draw your knees into your chest. And then slowly bring your shins down into your child's pose. Good. Perfect. He's going to let his breath and his blood balance. And I just want to point out, particularly when you're helping someone get into a headstand, try not to rush them. Don't tell them to kick their leg up and that you'll catch them. At no point should you be catching a student into a posture. Instead, you're providing more surface area for them to lean into, and then you want to encourage them to find the strength and the line within themselves instead of relying on you to do the work for them. At no point do you want your student to become like dependent on you to hold the shape for them, because you're not always going to be there with them to do that work, right? Cool. Thanks. Good job. All right, that's all I've got for our headstand practice. There are like 1,000 different ways to get into your headstand, 1,000 different places in your yoga practice that you can like add a headstand into the flow. I feel like that's a totally different like sequencing video. This is more the basics, and this is a really effective way to get your hips and your legs up over your head while reducing your risk of injury and easing your sense of fear. I know a lot of people come into their inversion practice with, a lot of fear from the past. I really want everyone to like unlock that fear, really sit with that fear, feel it, and then try to get to the root, and then find ways that you can still do this practice and still do this work without succumbing to your fear. You have the power. You can unlock this like limitless potential that lives within you. Let's bring our hands to our heart. Give your palms a little rub. Take a long breath in. Big sigh out. Let your hands rest on your knees. Get really clear with how you want to approach your entire physical practice. What message do you want it to send? And what message do you want to receive? Remember, you are capable, you are strong, and as much as you put into the physicality, you will get out tenfold, and then all this stuff that you didn't expect comes flooding in with it. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much.